The restorative justice system takes aim at resolving conflicts, and it relies on non-punitive ways to control crime and criminals, and I'm going to say delinquency as well for talking about juveniles. So what is restorative justice? Basically, it's a system of criminal justice which focuses on the rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. It uses dispute resolutions, different types of processes involved in dispute resolution, like mediation, negotiation. Most crimes, the offender and the victim know each other or have some sort of relationship, and the goal is to address and resolve the issues that produce the conflict between them, rather than treat them and label them as victim and criminal. The point being that society should reconcile the parties, not choose to punish. A restorative justice program aims to get offenders to take responsibility for their actions, to understand the harm that they have caused, to give them an opportunity to redeem themselves, and to discourage them from causing further harm. For the victims, its goal is to give them an active role in the process and to reduce feelings of anxiety and powerlessness. Restorative justice is founded on an alternative theory to the traditional methods of justice, which, as we've discussed, focused on retribution. However, restorative justice programs can complement these traditional methods. Let's talk about this process. According to John Braithwaite, restorative justice is a process where all stakeholders, the offender, the victim, those affected by the criminal act, which could be family, workplace, school, society, etc. A process where all stakeholders affected by an injustice have an opportunity to discuss how they have been affected by the injustice and to decide what should be done to repair the harm. With crime, restorative justice is about the idea that because crime hurts, justice should heal. It follows that conversations with those who have been hurt and with those who have inflicted the harm must be central to the process. Although law professionals may have secondary roles in facilitating the restorative justice process, it is the citizens who must take up the majority of the responsibility in healing the pains caused by crime. The process of restorative justice thus turns on or shifts the responsibility for addressing crime in general. Sentencing circles, sometimes called peacemaking circles, use traditional circle ritual and structure to involve all interested parties. The procedure commonly works as follows. The offender applies for the intervention. A healing circle is held for the victim. A healing circle is held for the offender. A sentencing circle is held. And finally, follow-up circles to monitor progress. According to Howard Zern, restorative justice differs from traditional criminal justice in terms of the guiding questions it asks. In restorative justice, the questions are: who has been hurt? What are their needs? Whose obligations are these? What are the causes? Who has a stake in the situation? What is the appropriate process to involve stakeholders in an effort to address causes and put things right? In contrast, traditional criminal justice asks what laws have been broken, who did it, what does or do the offenders deserve. Restorative justice is used throughout the world and has been implemented and embraced on many levels of the justice. So where have we seen it? In criminal cases, victims can testify about the crime's impact upon their lives, receive answers to questions about the incident, and participate in holding the offender accountable. Meanwhile, offenders can tell their story of why the crime occurred and how it has affected their lives. They are given an opportunity to compensate the victim directly to the degree possible. In criminal cases, this can include money, community service in general, and or specific to the offense, education to prevent repeat offending, and and expression of remorse. A courtroom process might employ pretrial diversion, dismissing charges after restitution, those items that the restitution is the offender paying back the victim, making the victim whole again, such as a property case. We talked about restitution. If property was stolen, they have to pay for it. If it was broken, got to pay back. Medical bills, got to pay back. In serious cases, a sentence may precede other restitution. In the community, concerned individuals meet with all parties to assess the experience and impact of the crime. Offenders listen to victims' experiences, preferably until they are able to empathize with the experience. Then they speak to their own experience, how they decided to commit the offense. A plan is made for the prevention of future occurrences and for the offender to address the damage to the injured parties. Then all agree. Community members hold the offender accountable for the completion of the plan, or to the plan that's put in place. In prisons, besides serving as an alternative to civil or criminal trials, restorative justice is also thought to be applicable to offenders who are currently incarcerated. The purpose of restorative justice in prisons is to assist with the prisoner's rehabilitation and eventually reintegration into society. By repairing the harm to the relationships between offenders and victims, and offenders and the community that resulted from the crime, restorative justice seeks to understand and address the circumstances which contributed to the crime. This is thought to prevent repeat offending once the offender is released. In social work cases, impoverished victims, such as foster children, are given the opportunity to describe their future hopes and make concrete plans to transition out of state custody in a group process with their supporters. In social justice cases, restorative justice is used for problem solving. In schools, restorative justice has also been implemented. In schools, it uses a similar model to programs used by the criminal justice system. Restorative practices can also include preventative measures designed to build skills and capacity in students as well as adults. Some examples of preventative measures in restorative practices might include teachers and students devising classroom expectations together or setting up community building in the classroom. Restorative justice also focuses on justice as needs and obligations, expands justice as conversations between the offender, victim, and the school, and recognizes accountability as understanding the impact of actions and repairing the harm. In this approach, teachers, students, and the community can reach agreements to meet all stakeholder needs. Collectively, it's emphasized as the group must create an action plan to heal the harm and find a way to bring the offender back into the community. So it's certainly been implemented in practice, but there are still some challenges of restorative justice. Some think, is this a political movement or is this a treatment process? Some view it as a social movement rather than rehabilitation and question whether or not it can really survive, and does it really secure society? There's a focus on security for society. Cultural and social differences, must be wary of those. What might be restorative in one subculture might be insulting or damaging in another. Also, there's no single definition of what constitutes restorative justice. It's very broadly defined. As I've described the process, it kind of sounds like, well, whatever the community puts together, right? It's hard to balance the needs of the offenders and the victims. Too much focus on one stakeholder over another lose the risks of assessing the needs, and you also increase the risk of reoffending. The benefits may work only in the short term, but they don't really take into account long-term treatment needs. And in some cases, it minimizes the seriousness of the crime. an example of that is domestic violence. It may solve this one issue in the short term, but does it rehabilitate the offender for the long term, or is it just going to be a continual process of domestic violence? So it's not without its challenges. It's still fairly new. It is a good idea, and it has been implemented, but only time will tell to see how successful restorative justice will be. So that completes our discussion on Chapter 10. Chapter 11, we turn to corrections.